The bullies tried to humiliate the new girl at prom. Big mistake. She was a hidden martial artist. The silk fabric of Emma Chen's handmade prom dress lay scattered across the gymnasium floor, torn into ribbons by cruel hands. Red punch dripped. From the delicate beadwork her grandmother had sewn for months, each crystal now reflecting the harsh, fluorescent lights like tears. Madison Parker stood over the destruction, her diamond tiara catching the light as she smiled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from absolute power. What Madison didn't know was that the quiet girl kneeling among the ruins had spent the last 8 years mastering disciplines that could end careers with a single calculated movement. The prom queen was about to learn that some people's silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Chen had arrived in Riverside 3 weeks before prom season, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a secret that would have changed everything if anyone had bothered to look beyond her quiet demeanor. Her father's job transfer from Portland had torn her away from Master Kim's academy, where she'd earned black belts in 3 different martial arts by age 17. The disciplined world of structured training and respect had been replaced by the chaos of Riverside High, where social warfare was the only curriculum that seemed to matter. The apartment she shared with her mother sat on the wrong side of Riverside's carefully maintained social boundaries, while Madison Parker's family mansion overlooked the country club from its position on Hillcrest Drive. Emma's bedroom window faced the parking lot of Chen's family restaurant, where she worked every evening to help cover their rent. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone at school, especially Madison, who had made it her personal mission to ensure Emma understood exactly where she belonged in Riverside's social hierarchy. Lisa Chen watched her daughter adapt to their new life with the same grace she'd shown through years of military family relocations, but this move felt different. Emma's father had taken a position with a tech company that promised stability, yet the transition to civilian life in a small town had been harder than any of their previous moves. Emma spoke less each day, her natural confidence dimming under the weight of trying to fit into a world that seemed determined to reject her. At Riverside High, Emma discovered that her academic achievements meant nothing without the right last name or zip code. Her black belt certificates remained hidden in her dresser drawer, along with tournament trophies and photos from her old dojo. She'd learned early that mentioning her martial arts background only invited mockery from students who saw violence as entertainment rather than discipline. The popular kids at Riverside measured worth in designer labels and social media followers, currencies Emma neither possessed nor particularly desired. The first week had been bearable through careful invisibility. Emma chose seats in the back of classrooms, ate lunch alone in the library, and navigated hallways with the stealth she'd learned from years of sparring practice. She observed the school's social ecosystem with the analytical mind her martial arts training had developed, quickly identifying the power structures and unspoken rules that governed student interactions. Madison Parker ruled Riverside High with the efficiency of someone born to command. Her father owned the largest real estate development company in town. Her mother chaired the school board, and Madison herself had been prom queen candidate since freshman year. She possessed the kind of effortless beauty that made other girls question their own worth, and the sharp intelligence to weaponize that insecurity against anyone who threatened her position. Jake Williams, the football team's star quarterback, served as Madison's perfect complement. Together, they represented everything Riverside valued: athletic achievement, family connections, and the promise of continuing the town's traditions into the next generation. Their relationship had been documented on social media since middle school, creating a mythology around their romance that made them seem untouchable. Sophie Martinez and Tyler Brooks completed Madison's inner circle, each playing their roles with practiced precision. Sophie provided the enthusiasm and loyalty that made Madison's cruelty seem like playful teasing, while Tyler handled the physical intimidation that kept Madison's targets in line. They moved through the school like celebrities, trailing followers, and leaving devastation in their wake. Emma might have remained invisible indefinitely if not for AP Physics. The advanced placement course represented her best chance at college scholarships. Despite the obvious social risks of academic excellence at Riverside High, she kept her head down during lectures, took notes in careful silence, and hoped her test scores wouldn't attract unwanted attention. The moment that changed everything happened during a lab experiment on momentum and force. Their teacher, Mrs. Davis, had paired students randomly, and Emma found herself working alongside Jake Williams. The quarterback approached the assignment with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to having others handle his academic responsibilities. But Emma's precise calculations and methodical approach quickly made it clear she didn't need his help. When Jake suggested modifying their experimental design in a way that would have invalidated their results, Emma politely corrected his understanding of the physics involved. Her explanation was quiet and respectful, delivered with the same careful control she applied to everything at Riverside High, but Jake's face flushed red as other students noticed the exchange, his embarrassment at being corrected by the new girl transforming immediately into resentment. Madison witnessed the interaction from across the lab, her sharp eyes catching the moment when her boyfriend's authority was challenged by someone she'd barely considered worth noticing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The quiet Asian girl who worked at the Chinese restaurant had just committed the unforgivable sin of making Jake Williams look foolish in front of his peers. Madison's smile was sharp as glass as she began planning Emma's education in Riverside's real curriculum. The targeting began subtly, as it always did with Madison's campaigns. Emma's locker would be mysteriously jammed between classes, forcing her to arrive late to her next period. Her textbooks would disappear from her desk during lunch, only to be found later in trash cans with pages torn out. These incidents seemed random to teachers and administrators, but Emma recognized the pattern immediately. She was being hunted by predators who had perfected their craft through years of practice. Emma's martial arts training had taught her to recognize aggression in all its forms, and she understood that Madison's attacks were designed to provoke a reaction that would justify escalation. The discipline that had carried her through countless tournaments and training sessions now served a different purpose: survival in an environment where showing weakness or strength would be equally dangerous. She endured each humiliation with stoic silence, knowing that any response would give Madison the excuse she was looking for to destroy her completely. Madison Parker had never encountered resistance like Emma's silence. At Riverside High, power flowed through carefully maintained channels that Madison had spent 4 years perfecting. Her authority wasn't just social, it was institutional, woven into the fabric of how the school operated. Principal Johnson owed his position to a recommendation from Madison's mother during his hiring process 3 years earlier. Coach Roberts relied on donations from the Parker Family Foundation to fund the athletic programs that kept Riverside competitive with wealthier districts. Even the custodial staff knew better than to cross someone whose family's construction company had built half the buildings in town. The Parker family empire extended far beyond high school politics. Robert Parker's development company had transformed Riverside from a sleepy agricultural community into an upscale suburb over the past 2 decades. Every strip mall, housing development, and commercial district bore his signature, creating a web of economic dependence that ensured the family's influence touched every aspect of local life. Diane Parker leveraged this foundation into social control, chairing committees and boards that shaped everything from school curriculum to city planning. Madison had inherited more than wealth from her parents. She'd absorbed their understanding of how power really worked. Money was just the beginning. True control came from making people need you, from creating systems where crossing you meant losing everything that mattered. She'd watched her mother destroy teachers who challenged her educational policies, and her father bankrupt contractors who didn't follow his specifications. These lessons had shaped Madison's approach to high school dominance with surgical precision. The student body at Riverside High existed in carefully maintained layers, each group serving specific functions in Madison's ecosystem. The athletes provided muscle and social credibility, their success on playing fields translating into campus authority. The academic achievers offered intellectual validation, their achievements reflecting well on the school's elite, while their dependence on recommendation letters kept them compliant. The performing arts students added cultural sophistication to school events, their creativity channeled into celebrating the very system that marginalized them. Beneath these visible groups lay the invisible majority, students who survived by avoiding attention, doing just enough to blend into the background without triggering anyone's notice. These were the kids who ate lunch in empty classrooms, who walked longer routes to avoid popular gathering spots, who had learned that safety came through strategic irrelevance. Madison rarely bothered with them unless she needed to make examples, but their silent fear provided the foundation for her authority. Emma's arrival had disrupted this careful balance in ways Madison was still analyzing. The new girl didn't fit into any of the established categories. She wasn't wealthy enough to challenge Madison's social position, wasn't connected enough to threaten her political influence. Yet something about Emma's composure suggested depths that made Madison uncomfortable. Most transfer students either sought Madison's approval or cowered from her attention. Emma simply existed as if Madison's opinion of her was irrelevant. This indifference was more threatening than any direct challenge could have been. Madison's power depended on universal acknowledgement of her importance. Students might hate her, fear her, or worship her, but they all recognized her significance. Emma's apparent immunity to Madison's gravitational pull suggested either dangerous naivety or dangerous confidence. Either possibility required immediate investigation and correction. The campaign against Emma escalated systematically, each incident designed to test different pressure points while maintaining plausible deniability. Madison's followers understood their roles intuitively, having participated in dozens of similar operations over the years. Sophie would accidentally spill drinks on Emma's homework, apologizing profusely while ensuring the damage was irreversible. Tyler would bump into Emma in crowded hallways, his size and momentum sending her stumbling, while he offered insincere apologies. Jake would make seemingly innocent comments about Emma's clothes or appearance, delivered with just enough ambiguity that teachers couldn't identify them as harassment. These attacks required no coordination or discussion among Madison's inner circle. They developed their methods through years of practice, refining techniques that caused maximum psychological damage while avoiding administrative consequences. The beauty of their system lay in its subtlety. Each individual incident seemed minor, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Previous targets had either transferred schools or suffered complete social isolation within weeks. Emma's resilience puzzled Madison's team. The new girl absorbed each attack with the same calm expression, never crying, never complaining, never even acknowledging that she understood what was happening. Her homework was completed, despite being destroyed. Her appearance remained neat despite constant accidents. Her academic performance stayed perfect despite the psychological pressure. This unnatural composure suggested either deep emotional damage or training that Madison couldn't identify. Jake Williams found Emma's resistance particularly frustrating. As Riverside's star quarterback, he was accustomed to universal recognition of his status. Teachers praised his leadership, students sought his approval, college recruiters courted his attention. Emma treated him with the same polite indifference. She showed everyone else, acknowledging his presence without showing any awareness of his importance. Her behavior during the physics lab had been especially galling. She'd corrected his understanding of momentum with the same tone she might use to ask for directions. The football team followed Jake's lead in their treatment of Emma, but their hearts weren't really in it. Most players came from working-class families and recognized something familiar in Emma's quiet dignity. Her job at the Chinese restaurant reminded them of their own after-school employment. Her modest clothes echoed their own financial constraints, and her focus on academics reflected their own hopes for college opportunities. Still, loyalty to Jake and fear of Madison kept them participating in the harassment campaign, though with less enthusiasm than Madison would have preferred. Sophie Martinez served as Madison's emotional intelligence officer, interpreting social dynamics and identifying psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited. She'd studied Emma's behavior patterns obsessively, noting everything from her lunch choices to her walking routes to her interaction styles with different teachers. Sophie's analysis painted a picture of someone who was either remarkably well-adjusted or hiding significant trauma. The lack of obvious emotional triggers was itself suspicious. Tyler Brooks represented the physical intimidation component of Madison's arsenal. His imposing size and aggressive demeanor usually encouraged compliance through implicit threat rather than actual violence. Most students gave him wide berth in hallways, avoided making eye contact during confrontations, and modified their behavior to avoid his attention. Emma moved around Tyler as if he were simply another piece of hallway furniture, neither fearful nor challenging, just pragmatically efficient in her navigation. The teachers at Riverside High occupied an uncomfortable position in Madison's ecosystem. Most recognized her behavior as problematic, but felt powerless to address it effectively. Challenging Madison meant risking their careers through her mother's school board influence, while her father's economic importance to the community created additional pressure to maintain positive relationships with the family. They developed elaborate systems of willful blindness, focusing intensely on curriculum, while ignoring the social dynamics that shaped their students' daily experiences. Mrs. Davis stood as the notable exception to this pattern of institutional complicity. Her tenure and reputation as an exceptional educator provided some protection from the Parker family's influence, and her scientific training made her naturally skeptical of authority claims that couldn't be verified through evidence. She'd watched Madison's campaign against Emma with growing concern, recognizing patterns that reminded her of research on systematic psychological manipulation. Emma's perfect test scores and thoughtful class participation had impressed Mrs. Davis from the beginning. The girls' questions demonstrated deep understanding of scientific principles and genuine curiosity about how physical laws applied to real-world problems. Her lab reports were models of clarity and precision, suggesting either exceptional natural talent or extensive previous training in scientific methodology. Emma's behavior during the harassment campaign only increased Mrs. Davis's respect for her character. The approaching prom season added urgency to Madison's campaign against Emma. As the presumptive prom queen, Madison needed to ensure that no alternative narrative could emerge to challenge her coronation. Previous years had seen carefully orchestrated eliminations of potential competitors, but Emma presented a different kind of threat. She wasn't competing for prom queen. She seemed completely uninterested in the entire social hierarchy that made prom meaningful. This indifference was itself a form of rebellion that could inspire others to question the systems Madison had worked so hard to control. The collision that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in the chemistry lab. Emma had arrived, early to complete an extra credit project, her dedication to academic excellence providing both purpose and escape from the social minefield that defined her daily existence. She worked methodically through complex molecular calculations, finding peace in the predictable logic of scientific formulas where variables behaved according to established laws rather than arbitrary social whims. Madison entered the lab during her free period, ostensibly to discuss makeup work with Mr. Henderson, but actually to plant the seeds of humiliation she'd been cultivating for weeks. She discovered through careful social reconnaissance that Emma took pride in her academic achievements, particularly in the sciences, where her natural aptitude had earned grudging respect, even from teachers who typically favored more socially prominent students. Academic embarrassment would strike at the core of Emma's identity in ways that simple social exclusion had failed to accomplish. The confrontation began innocuously enough. Madison approached Emma's workstation with her trademark smile, the expression that had charmed teachers and intimidated students for 4 years. She complimented Emma's organizational skills and asked seemingly innocent questions about the experiment Emma was conducting. Her tone was friendly, almost admiring, which immediately put Emma on high alert. Madison Parker didn't waste energy on genuine compliments for social inferiors. Emma responded with cautious politeness, explaining her project on chemical reaction. Rates while maintaining the careful distance she'd learned was necessary around Riverside's royalty. She detailed her hypothesis about temperature's effect on molecular collision frequency, her voice gaining confidence as she discussed concepts that fascinated her. For a moment, the familiar joy of scientific discovery overcame her wariness. About Madison's unexpected interest, Madison listened with apparent fascination, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated surprising knowledge of chemistry principles. Emma found herself relaxing slightly, wondering if perhaps she'd misjudged the prom queen candidate. Maybe Madison was genuinely interested in academics beyond their utility for college applications. Maybe there was more depth to Riverside's social hierarchy than Emma had assumed. Maybe this could be the beginning of a truce that would make her remaining time at Riverside tolerable. The trap sprung with devastating precision. Madison's questions gradually shifted from academic curiosity to subtle challenges of Emma's methodology. She suggested alternative approaches that sounded plausible but would actually contaminate the experimental results. When Emma politely explained why those modifications wouldn't work, Madison's expression shifted to one of confused disappointment, as if Emma was being deliberately obstructionist rather than scientifically accurate. Other students began filtering into the lab for their next class, providing Madison with the audience she'd been orchestrating. Jake Williams entered with his usual swagger, followed by Sophie Martinez and several other members of Madison's inner circle. They positioned themselves strategically around the lab, creating an informal tribunal that would witness Emma's educational moment about the real power structures at Riverside High. Madison's voice carried clearly across the lab as she expressed concern about Emma's willingness to collaborate on academic projects. She wondered aloud whether Emma's perfectionist tendencies might be holding back other students who could benefit from her knowledge. The implications were carefully crafted. Emma was selfish, antisocial, perhaps even intellectually arrogant. These character assassinations were delivered with the same sweet smile that had made Madison popular with teachers and devastating to her enemies. Emma felt the familiar flush of anger that her martial arts training had taught her to recognize. And control. Master Kim's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that emotional reactions were the enemy's greatest weapon. She maintained her composure while calculating responses, knowing that any defense would be twisted into evidence of the very character flaws Madison was suggesting. The trap was perfectly constructed. Emma could appear guilty by defending herself, or guilty by remaining silent. Jake Williams joined the conversation with the casual cruelty that had made him Madison's perfect complement. He suggested that maybe Emma thought she was too smart for regular group work, that her background at previous schools had given her an attitude problem. His comments were designed to remind everyone present of Emma's outsider status while positioning himself as the defender of Riverside's inclusive values. The irony would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so serious. Sophie Martinez provided the emotional manipulation that completed Madison's strategy. She expressed disappointment that Emma seemed unwilling to help struggling students understand difficult concepts. Sophie's own academic mediocrity was well known, making her apparent concern for learning opportunities particularly hypocritical, but her performance was convincing enough to sway observers who weren't analyzing. The subtext. Emma was being painted as an elitist who hoarded knowledge rather than sharing it generously. The other students watched this exchange with the fascination of spectators at a gladiatorial contest. Most recognized the manipulative techniques being employed, but self-preservation kept them from intervening. They'd seen these character assassinations before and understood that challenging Madison's narrative would make them the next targets. Their silence was both complicity and survival strategy in an environment where neutrality was the only safety. Emma's response surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of defending her character or explaining her methodology, she simply invited Madison to partner with her on the next phase of the experiment. Her offer was genuine, delivered without sarcasm or challenge, extending exactly the collaboration Madison had claimed to want. The unexpected generosity of this response caught Madison off guard, disrupting the emotional trajectory she'd been building toward Emma's public humiliation. Madison found herself trapped by her own rhetoric. She'd demanded collaboration and been offered it in the most straightforward way possible. Refusing would expose the artificial nature of her concern for academic cooperation. Accepting would require her to actually participate in scientific work that she'd rather delegate to others. Either choice undermined the narrative she'd been constructing about Emma's antisocial tendencies. The partnership that followed was a masterclass in passive resistance. Emma treated Madison as a genuine collaborator, explaining each step of the experimental process with the patience of a dedicated teacher. She asked for Madison's input on data interpretation, incorporated her suggestions wherever scientifically possible, and credited her contributions to their shared conclusions. Emma's behavior was so perfectly cooperative that Madison couldn't identify any legitimate complaints without revealing her own ulterior motives. Jake Williams grew increasingly frustrated as he watched his girlfriend navigate this unexpected dynamic. Madison was supposed to be dismantling Emma's reputation, not participating in educational activities that made them appear friendly. His attempts to redirect the conversation towards social topics were politely deflected by Emma's focus on their experimental results. The chemistry project became a zone of neutrality that Emma controlled through pure academic competence. Sophie Martinez tried to salvage the situation by suggesting that Emma was being condescending in her explanations, treating Madison like she didn't understand basic concepts. But Madison's genuine engagement with the work made these criticisms seem petty and unfounded. Emma's teaching style was patient and respectful, exactly what Madison had claimed to want from potential study partners. Sophie's complaints revealed more about her own insecurities than Emma's behavior. Mr. Henderson observed this interaction with growing interest. He'd taught at Riverside long enough to recognize Madison's usual manipulation tactics. But Emma's response was unlike anything he'd witnessed. Instead of falling into the emotional traps that typically destroyed Madison's targets, Emma had transformed the confrontation into a genuine learning opportunity. Her approach demonstrated maturity and social intelligence that impressed him far more than Madison's performative concern for academic collaboration. The period ended with Madison and Emma having produced excellent experimental results and what appeared to observers as a successful academic partnership. Madison found herself publicly committed to working with Emma on future projects, having expressed such enthusiasm for collaboration that backing out would seem arbitrary and mean-spirited. Emma had neutralized an attack by taking it seriously, rather than defensively, turning Madison's weapon into an opportunity for actual education. As students filed out of the lab, Emma noticed Alex Thompson lingering near her workstation. Alex had been observing the entire interaction with unusual intensity, taking notes that seemed far more detailed than necessary for chemistry class. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma saw something unexpected in Alex's expression. Recognition, perhaps even admiration. Alex quickly gathered their materials and left without speaking. But Emma sensed that something significant had just happened beyond the obvious chemistry lesson. Madison's frustration was evident as she left the lab with her entourage. The morning had not gone according to plan, and her inability to humiliate Emma in front of witnesses represented a significant tactical failure. Jake's disappointed expression made it clear that he expected more dramatic results from Madison's campaign against the new girl. Sophie's attempts to spin the interaction as somehow problematic for Emma rang hollow when Madison herself had appeared. To enjoy their collaboration, Emma remained in the lab after the others left, reviewing their experimental data with satisfaction that had nothing to do with grades or academic achievement. She'd faced a coordinated attack and emerged stronger, rather than damaged. Her martial arts training had prepared her for physical confrontations, but this felt like a different kind of victory, one achieved through intellectual rather than physical discipline. Madison Parker was learning that some opponents couldn't be defeated through conventional warfare. Alex Thompson had been documenting the social dynamics at Riverside High for 18 months, ever since transferring from a school district that had undergone a similar transformation from academic excellence to social brutality. What they witnessed wasn't random teenage cruelty. It was systematic psychological warfare designed to maintain power structures that benefited a select few at the expense of everyone else. Alex's careful observations filled dozens of notebooks, hidden in their bedroom, each entry time-stamped and categorized according to the manipulation techniques being employed. The decision to remain invisible had been strategic rather than natural for Alex. In their previous school, they'd attempted direct confrontation against similar power structures and learned painful lessons about the futility of individual resistance against institutional corruption. The bullies had connections, protection, and resources that made them nearly untouchable through conventional means. Alex's family had been forced to relocate after their complaints about systematic harassment resulted in legal threats and economic retaliation against their parents' businesses. Riverside High represented a fresh start and an opportunity to study these dynamics from a position of safety. Alex cultivated the persona of an unremarkable middle-tier student, competent enough to avoid attention, but not exceptional enough to threaten anyone's position. They participated in group projects without standing out, maintained acceptable grades without academic distinction, and navigated social situations with careful neutrality that kept them off everyone's radar. This invisibility provided the perfect cover for their real purpose, gathering evidence. The notebooks contained detailed records of Madison's campaign strategies, documented patterns of teacher complicity, financial connections between influential families and school administration, and psychological profiles of both perpetrators and victims. Alex had learned to recognize the warning signs that preceded major escalations, the subtle power negotiations that determined which students would be targeted, and the administrative responses that consistently protected aggressors while blaming victims for provoking attacks. Emma's arrival had disrupted established patterns in ways that Alex found both fascinating and concerning. Most transfer students either sought immediate integration into existing social groups or accepted marginalization as the price of survival. Emma's approach was entirely different. She seemed genuinely indifferent to the social hierarchies that governed everyone else's behavior. This indifference represented either dangerous naivety or sophisticated strategy, and Alex couldn't determine which interpretation was correct. The chemistry lab incident had provided crucial data about Emma's true capabilities. Her handling of Madison's manipulation attempt demonstrated social intelligence and emotional control that suggested extensive training in conflict resolution. The way she'd transformed potential humiliation into genuine collaboration was particularly impressive, requiring real-time analysis of social dynamics and strategic thinking under pressure. These weren't natural talents, they were developed skills that indicated serious preparation for exactly these kinds of confrontations. Alex began researching Emma's background using techniques learned from their previous experiences with institutional investigation. Public records revealed basic information about her family's relocation from Portland, her father's employment with a technology company, and their residence in Riverside's less affluent district. School enrollment records showed excellent academic performance and participation in advanced placement courses, but no mention of extracurricular activities that might explain her unusual composure under pressure. Social media searches proved more revealing. Emma's accounts were sparse and carefully curated, showing none of the personal details that most teenagers shared freely online. Her photos focused on academic achievements and family events rather than social activities or friend groups. The absence of typical teenage social media behavior was itself significant. It suggested someone who understood the importance of controlling information flow and maintaining operational security. The most intriguing discovery came through reverse image searches of Emma's few posted photos. Several images had been taken at locations that Alex recognized as martial arts tournaments and training facilities. The backgrounds showed competition, banners, trophy displays, and groups of people in fighting gear that Emma had carefully cropped out of her social media versions. She was hiding something significant about her background, and Alex suspected it was exactly the kind of something that could change the power dynamics at Riverside High. Alex's investigation methods had been refined through months of careful practice. They'd learned to gather information without leaving digital footprints, to observe without being noticed, and to document without creating evidence of their surveillance activities. The techniques were partially inspired by journalism courses and partially developed through necessity after their previous experiences with retaliation. Information was power, but only if it remained secret until the right moment for revelation. The decision to make contact with Emma required careful consideration of risks and potential benefits. Direct approach could expose Alex's surveillance activities and compromise the evidence they'd been gathering for over a year. But Emma's unique position as someone who seemed immune to Madison's usual tactics made her a potential catalyst for the kind of systematic change Alex had been hoping to document. The chemistry lab incident suggested Emma might be receptive to alliance without requiring extensive explanation of Alex's motivations. The first contact came through a seemingly casual interaction in the library during lunch period. Alex approached Emma's table with a chemistry textbook and asked permission to sit nearby, explaining that the cafeteria was too noisy for serious studying. Emma nodded politely and returned to her own work, creating the kind of neutral social interaction that Alex had observed was Emma's preferred mode of engagement with unfamiliar students. Alex spent the lunch period taking genuine chemistry notes while observing Emma's study habits and social awareness patterns. Emma worked methodically through calculus problems with the focused concentration of someone accustomed to extended periods of intellectual effort. She occasionally glanced up to monitor the library's social dynamics, but showed no interest in participating in the conversations happening at other tables. Her body language suggested alertness rather than anxiety. She was monitoring her environment without being controlled by it. The conversation began when Alex deliberately struggled with a chemistry problem they could have solved easily, creating an opportunity for Emma to offer assistance without appearing to seek social interaction. Emma's explanation was clear and impatient, demonstrating the same teaching skills she'd shown during the chemistry lab incident with Madison. Her approach suggested experience working with students who needed academic support, perhaps from tutoring work or volunteer activities she hadn't mentioned to anyone at Riverside. Alex reciprocated by sharing insights about Riverside's academic culture that would be useful for a transfer student still learning to navigate the system. They explained which teachers responded well to different communication styles, which classroom dynamics to avoid, and how to manage academic excellence without triggering social retaliation. The advice was practical and specific, demonstrating knowledge that could only come from careful observation of educational politics. Emma's responses revealed intelligence and strategic thinking that confirmed Alex's suspicions about her background. She asked perceptive questions about administrative hierarchies, teacher evaluation systems, and the informal networks that influenced academic opportunities. Her interest went beyond personal survival. She was analyzing institutional structures, with the systematic approach of someone trained to identify organizational weaknesses and leverage points for change. The lunch period conversation established a foundation for future interactions without committing either party to deeper involvement. Alex had tested Emma's receptiveness to alliance while maintaining plausible deniability about their real purposes. Emma had demonstrated social intelligence and institutional awareness that suggested she might be prepared for more sophisticated resistance strategies than simple individual survival. Both students left the library with new appreciation for each other's capabilities and potential value as allies. Over the following days, Alex began sharing more specific information about Madison's campaign patterns and the broader power structures that enabled her behavior. These conversations were carefully structured as academic discussions about social psychology and institutional dynamics, allowing both students to explore alliance possibilities without explicitly committing to coordinated resistance. Alex's documentation provided evidence for patterns that Emma had observed but couldn't fully analyze from her limited perspective as a recent arrival. Emma's contributions to these discussions revealed training in conflict analysis and strategic planning that went far beyond normal teenage experience. She understood concepts like information warfare, psychological manipulation, and systematic intimidation with the fluency of someone who'd studied these topics extensively. Her questions about Madison's support networks and administrative protection demonstrated appreciation for the complexity of institutional change that most students never developed. The partnership that emerged was based on complementary skills and shared understanding of the real challenges they faced. Alex brought extensive documentation, institutional knowledge, and experience with resistance strategies that had failed. In similar environments, Emma contributed analytical intelligence, emotional control under pressure, and mysterious background preparation that might provide new approaches to seemingly impossible problems. Together, they began planning responses that neither could have implemented alone. Madison's escalating campaign against Emma provided the perfect laboratory for testing their collaborative strategies. Each attack could be documented, analyzed, and countered using techniques that combined Alex's surveillance capabilities with Emma's unexpected resistance methods. They were building toward something neither fully understood yet, a confrontation that would test everything they'd learned about power, resistance, and the possibility of systematic change in environments designed to prevent exactly that kind of transformation. Prom night arrived with the orchestrated grandeur that had defined Riverside High's social calendar for decades. The grand hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and silk draping that cost more than most families spent on entire vacations. Madison Parker descended the marble staircase like royalty claiming her throne, her custom designer gown, shimmering with thousands of hand-sewn crystals that caught the light with every calculated movement. This was her coronation night, the culmination of 4 years building toward absolute social dominance. Emma entered quietly through the side entrance, wearing the dress her grandmother had spent months creating with love and traditional techniques, passed down through generations. The silk fabric told stories of heritage and sacrifice, each intricate detail representing hours of careful work by arthritic hands that refused to let financial constraints diminish her granddaughter's special moment. Emma moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in her own skin, unburdened by the desperate need for validation that drove most of her classmates' behavior. Madison's plan unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Sophie Martinez had strategically spilled red punch across the buffet table, creating the perfect accident waiting to happen. Tyler Brooks positioned himself near the dance floor's edge, ready to provide the physical momentum needed to ensure Emma's humiliation would be both spectacular and seemingly unintentional. Jake Williams stood ready with his phone to capture the moment that would cement Emma's social destruction and guarantee Madison's legendary status. The attack came during the evening's most crowded moment, when all attention focused on the dance floor and conversations reached their loudest volume. Tyler bumped into Emma with calculated force, sending her stumbling directly into Sophie's punch trap. The red liquid cascaded across the handmade silk like blood across snow, the ancient fabric absorbing the sticky sweetness that would permanently stain months of loving craftsmanship. Madison's laughter rang across the ballroom as phones emerged to document Emma's apparent clumsiness. But Emma's response shattered every expectation. Instead of tears or embarrassment, she smiled with genuine warmth and thanked Tyler for the accidental collision. She complimented Sophie on her coordination in creating such an artistic pattern across the fabric, suggesting the stains looked almost intentional in their abstract beauty. Her reaction was so gracious and unexpected that the gathered crowd found themselves applauding her composure rather than laughing at her misfortune. Madison's frustration erupted into open cruelty as her carefully planned humiliation transformed into admiration for Emma's character. She announced loudly that Emma's grandmother's sewing skills were apparently better suited for cleaning rags than formal wear, since the dress seemed designed to absorb spills. The comment crossed every line of decency, attacking not just Emma, but the elderly woman who'd poured her heart into creating something beautiful for her granddaughter's special night. Emma's expression shifted for the first time since arriving at Riverside High. The gentle composure that had frustrated Madison for weeks hardened into something far more dangerous. Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent ballroom. as she addressed Madison with the kind of controlled intensity that made experienced fighters step backward instinctively. She thanked Madison for finally revealing her true character to everyone present, noting that authentic cruelty was actually refreshing after weeks of manipulative games. Then Emma moved. 8 years of martial arts training compressed into fluid motion that seemed to slow time itself. She spun away from Tyler's reaching hands with liquid grace, her damaged dress flowing like water as she pivoted toward Madison. With predatory focus, her stance shifted subtly, weight distributing across both feet in preparation for techniques that could end careers or lives depending on her intentions. The crowd sensed imminent violence even if they couldn't identify the specific threat. Madison stepped backward reflexively, her social confidence crumbling as she faced something entirely outside her experience. The girl she'd been tormenting for weeks suddenly radiated controlled danger that made her primitive survival instincts scream warnings. Tyler moved to intervene but found himself gently redirected by movements he couldn't anticipate or counter. His superior size and strength rendered irrelevant by techniques he'd never encountered. Alex appeared at Emma's shoulder with perfect timing, phone recording everything. As Madison's entourage began retreating from a confrontation, they suddenly understood they couldn't win. The documentation Alex had gathered over 18 months was ready for release, but Emma's transformation from victim to predator provided the perfect moment for maximum impact. Social media posts began appearing instantly, showing Madison's cruelty, followed by Emma's restrained but unmistakable threat. Response: Emma spoke quietly to Madison, her words carrying only to the immediate circle, but her tone conveying absolute certainty about consequences that would follow any continuation of hostilities. She explained that she'd endured weeks of psychological warfare out of respect for the educational environment, but attacks on her family's honor crossed lines that demanded different responses. Her background included training in disciplines Madison couldn't even pronounce, much less defend against. The revelation spread through the ballroom like wildfire as students shared videos and messages about Emma's hidden identity as a nationally ranked martial artist. Alex's documentation provided context about Madison's systematic bullying campaign, transforming the evening from social celebration into exposure of institutional corruption. Teachers and administrators found themselves confronting evidence they'd spent months ignoring, their complicity suddenly visible to parents and community members. Madison's empire collapsed in real time as her support network evaporated. Jake Williams publicly distanced himself from her behavior, claiming he'd been manipulated into participating in activities he now recognized as morally wrong. Sophie Martinez tearfully apologized to Emma and other victims, exposing the psychological pressure Madison had used to maintain loyalty among her followers. Tyler Brooks simply walked away, his role as enforcer ending the moment he realized Emma could disable him without visible effort. The prom queen crown sat forgotten on its presentation table as Madison fled the ballroom in tears, her carefully constructed persona shattered beyond repair. Emma remained long enough to help with cleanup, her ruined dress creating no barrier to useful work. She danced with Alex and other students who'd found courage to approach her, creating the kind of inclusive celebration that Riverside had never experienced during Madison's reign. Principal Johnson announced his resignation the following Monday, unable to defend his administrative decisions in light of Alex's documented evidence. The school board implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies with real enforcement mechanisms. Emma's grandmother's dress was professionally restored and displayed in the school's trophy case as a symbol of dignity overcoming cruelty. Emma transferred to Portland's early college program for her senior year, pursuing advanced studies that matched her intellectual capabilities. But her influence at Riverside continued through the systems she and Alex had created for supporting targeted students and holding administrators accountable. Madison repeated her senior year after failing multiple courses, learning humility. Through academic struggle and community service requirements, the night that was supposed to crown Madison's supremacy instead marked the beginning of institutional change that protected future students from systematic psychological warfare. Emma's martial arts training had prepared her for physical confrontation, but her greater victory came through demonstrating that true strength protects others rather than dominating them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.